so grateful for Detlef Knappe for providing the PFAS background that he did earlier because he is the absolute expert. And that presentation was wonderful. I'm going to do a little PFAS in brief, which is really going to be more focused on actions and reactions, things that have happened since State of the River 2021 to now, because many of you are seasoned PFAS listeners and you've heard the story before. And I don't know if Kemp told you or not, but he stole this slide from me. I had to go outside. This was my slide. He stole it. So I'm just making sure that's clear. And so again, if you want to see the history of the PFAS issue in the Cape Fear Basin, I presented a full presentation on PFAS at last year's event. Please check it out at the website, along with all of the other amazing presentations that are up there. I do want to thank the journalists for this presentation and for all they're doing. Port City Daily, WECT, WWAY, who's here in the corner, NC Health News, NC Policy Watch, Coastal Review Online, the Star News, News and Observer, WHQR. They're all stories that are kind of, and Kelly Knoyer is here from WHQR up front. I just noticed. Glad you're here. There's going to be some clippings from all these folks, and they're doing their part to help educate the community. So I hope you're reading and paying attention and paying for subscriptions or donating to your local public radio. It's just my plug. And second of all, this is not PFAS 101, as I said. This is like a 200 level PFAS presentation. So I'm just going to go through real brief, what we already know. This was the Star News headline in June 2017. Here we are 6 years later. What are PFAS? Y'all heard that already from Detlef. I think y'all know. I'm going to skip that slide. Let me know if you don't know what PFAS is. Raise your hand. Just kidding. Here's a really great slide that Dr. Jamie DeWitt shared with me last year, and I just think it's a good one to put up. There's so much data being done, being researched on what health impacts might be caused by PFAS. This slide shows those that have high certainty, which are those hard lines. Kidney cancer, liver damage, testicular cancer, lower birth weight, reduced response to vaccines, which was huge during COVID. Not that COVID's gone, and then the jagged lines are there's science happening, but there's so much more. There's so much more research globally on the effects these chemicals have on our bodies and our environment, and so it's ever changing, and we just keep learning more and more. So since we last talked, I skipped over, I did have some slides about the Gen X exposure study, but Detlef covered some of that. So I just want to make one point about the Gen X exposure study part, and Dr. Jane Huppen is here somewhere in the back, I think. So part of that did include this, or she worked on with many community partners and others, this guidance on PFAS exposure and clinical follow-up. This is a whole bunch of research by the NIEHS where they try to help communities and physicians understand what to say to your doctor about PFAS and what your doctor should be testing for you if you're a person in a highly exposed community, which all of you are. And so this book was released last year. It's ginormous. It's out on the table. You're not going to want to read it. But thankfully, the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services produced a 4-pager, which we also have one copy of out on our registration table. And we will put the link to that in our post email to y'all. But feel free to take a picture of it. It basically provides you with guidance on what to say to your doctor. Like, hey, I live in this community. I've been drinking this water. Here are some things that I would like for you to test that are mostly things that would generally be covered by insurance. These are things that you would just want to be tested sooner. So here's the part where I'm trying to be like sort of uplifting about PFAS. This is like happy PFAS tales. Nothing is happy about PFAS, but this is like things that have happened and the ways that we've responded with Cape Fear River Watch and our partners and primarily the community. And I'm just really proud. And so I just wanted to share these things with you all today. So number one, the action. This is a little bit wonky, so stay with me. You guys are 200 class again. So ChemWars, these are ChemWars' screenshots from their Facebook page, the ChemWars Good Neighbor Facebook page. And I'm sure most of you saw those commercials where they're claiming they're a good neighbor. And this was just outlandish. So I had a call from DEQ because they were confused about receiving multiple petitions that they didn't understand. They thought they came from me. They didn't come from me. I emailed all of our fellow advocates. Does anybody know where these petitions are coming from? They're asking people to build a wall. They're asking DEQ to build the wall. And it turns out it was Chemours. So Chemours created this petition, and they legitimately put on their website, it's time for you to do your part to clean the Cape Fear River. Sign this petition and help build a wall, right? I mean, build a wall, it sounds familiar, right? But what they're talking about, is this barrier wall. And so the consent order that most of y'all know about, which came about when Cape Fear River Watch sued Chemours with our legal guidance from SCLC, and that resulted in this consent order, right? And the order requires groundwater. It requires a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the things it requires is that they clean up the groundwater on site, which is a highly contaminated site, 40 years of PFAS, just saturating that place. And it's seeping into the river. So tons and tons and tons of PFAS. So this one piece would build a wall. And before that wall, there'd be these catchment basins or wells. And they grab the water, and then they treat the water through granular activated carbon, the same stuff that CFPUA is using to filter the drinking water. That system costs a lot of money to maintain. You have to take the carbon, as Detlef mentioned. You have to have that carbon sent elsewhere. CFPUA folks are here. They know how much money this costs to maintain. The way the permit was written was such that Chemours was going to be allowed to dump a junk load of PFAS, to allow junk loads of PFAS to enter the river from this groundwater source, which meant that they wouldn't have to maintain that GAC system as much, which meant, guess what, it would be cheaper for them. So they were supporting the wall and asking everybody to support the wall. So what happened next was, this article on the left is this other Environmental Law Center article detailing what I've just talked about. And then through our legal support at SCLC, we encourage the DEQ to hold a public comment period and a public hearing. And then the reaction, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, is y'all showed up. It was about 300 comments. We had about 100 people show up at the hearing. Everybody got the wonky request that was, this barrier wall is important, but this permit sucks and it needs to be stronger. And what happened was that DEQ then issued a permit that was the strongest NPDES discharge permit in the country on PFAS. So thank you. And then what happened is they appealed it. So they said, build a wall, build a wall, build a wall. But then when they were like, people were like, hey, yeah, let's build a wall, but let's make it work. Then they said, nah, don't build that wall. That's a bad idea. You know, they're pretty transparent, right? It's just all about money. So then the reaction, we filed, again, with our supportive and genius folks at SCLC, a motion to intervene in that challenge. So we were supporting DEQ in their permit, basically, and what happened was we won that. And the permit stands. And the barrier wall was supposed to be put in place with the very strong limits on the discharge. It was supposed to be done already, but shocking to no one, they missed their deadline. The article on the right is from NC Policy Watch, Lisa Sorg, who did interview me for the story, but my comments were, I think, a little too snarky. So Jeff Gisler from the SCLC has his comment in there. And, you know, Chemours says they're delayed because the DEQ, you know, forced them to redo their plans because they had to make their permit protective. And what Jeff says in a less snarky way than I said was, maybe if you hadn't challenged the permit, you would be on time, right? You went through the courts and challenged the permit. And the deadline that was given to them was May 31st. That was the extension deadline that was given to them. That's yesterday. I've not heard about the barrier wall. Has anybody heard about the barrier wall being put? I don't think it's happened. SCLC is looking into that for us as well to see what's happening and what DEQ is doing about it. It's not up yet. So I'm gonna switch gears just a little bit. This is work with partners at Center for Environmental Health, Toxic Free NC, and Clean Cape Fear. And this was relative to our petition that we had submitted to the EPA to require Chemours to do a health study and a full epidemiological study of our region and force Chemours to pay for that stuff. And the EPA denied that permit. They claimed that they were granting the permit, but they weren't granting the permit. And so we sued the EPA, which is unfortunate, but that's what had to be done. So this year, what happened, since last year's State of the River, the in-between time, we had our day in court. Our day in court was February 14th. It was Valentine's Day of this year. Many, many of you showed up to that. We had spillover into the other room at the courthouse. We had a bus from Fayetteville of activists come down. We filled that court. The judge recognized that numerous times in his comments. Our lawyer who is there, this is not an SCLC situation. This is Bob Sussman. He was a lifetime career EPA lawyer. Now he's a consultant. He's in the middle of that picture there. He killed it at the hearing. He made very clear that the EPA has not granted the petition, that the EPA's work on PFAS doesn't even touch the requests that we made in our petition. But this event was really inspirational for a lot of people, but the judge ruled in EPA's favor. This judge decided that the EPA's response was good enough, and so we said no, we disagree, and we appealed that. So that's where that sits. It's in the courts. And shifting focus again, so here's the action of Chemours. Last fall, EPA issued some health advisory levels on some PFAS, including Gen X. And these are not regulatory federally unless there's some sort of order, like a consent order, that includes regulation relative to them, which does exist here. So our consent order requires that Chemours provide clean water filtration to well owners with Gen X at the health advisory level or any future health advisory level, if one should come about that's more strong and more protective than the current. So when the consent order was written, the health advisory level for Gen X was 140 parts per trillion. EPA changed that to 10. It's a huge difference. Chemours has been sampling wells since 2019 up in the Fayetteville region. They've been sampling wells in the lower Cape Fear since last April. They've found thousands and thousands of wells with contamination in them. The consent order stipulates that those with Gen X is special in this because there was a health advisory for it. There wasn't any for any others. So what Chemours now has to do is go back and resample all these folks and find all the folks between 10 and 140 and provide them a higher level of filtration than what they would have prior been allotted. The lower level filtration is called reverse osmosis. It's an under sink system. It doesn't affect your showers. It doesn't clean your bathtubs. It doesn't clean, the water that's coming out of your hose in your backyard that you're watering your plants with or filling up your pool with, or your dishwasher or your refrigerator filters. It's not enough. It's not enough for this community. It's not enough for everybody. The consent order requires for those with Gen X that they get granular activated carbon system. This is the whole house filtration system or a municipal hookup. So that, again, the trend is it's going to cost Chemours a heck of a lot more money to provide granular activated carbon systems and maintain them for 20 years under that maintenance that Detlef described earlier, or municipal hookups in which they're required to pay the water bill up to $75 a month for 20 years. It's going to cost them a lot of money. So what did they do? They challenged the health advisory level for Gen X. So what did we do? We filed a motion to intervene. And yes, this is my declaration, and it's 79 pages. It was really a lot of fun. And I I'm not even joking. I had really enjoyed this. I didn't write much of that, the lawyers did, but the pieces that I helped with were relative to doing this research on how much this is going to cost them. And back when I did this, it was $250 million at that point. That was the difference between the well owners at 140 and the well owners between 10 and 140. And that number has probably gone drastically up. I've been slightly busy the last couple of weeks. And so when I'm done, when this event is over, I'm going to dig back into the current numbers and see how high that number's gone up. But at that point, it was $250 million that we could put into this declaration that made it clear that their intentions around the challenge to that Gen X Health Advisory level were just about money, like everything that they do. They claimed it was bad science. That's just ridiculous. Next page. So I'm not calling this one an action because the others are like the action of the bad guy. These are like a call to action by the good guys, and that's all you. Since we started the Lower Cape Fear well sampling program again last April, I've gotten so many calls and so many visits and heard from so many people about the struggles that they're facing with this program in general and the resources that it allows them. And don't get me wrong, the consent order, super proud of it, right? But we wrote that, it was written, it was negotiated in 2019 with the understanding that we're gonna learn so much more from now till then. It was meant to be the beginning, not the end. And I fear that DEQ is using it as a ceiling to say, we can't do more because the consent order says this. And that's not true. The DEQ can do more. And we know now, from what we've learned, that they need to be doing more for these well owners. There's so many stories about folks that, for one, like can't, either they don't qualify for the whole house filtration because, again, you have to have Gen X. If you don't have Gen X, you don't get the whole house filtration or the municipal hookup. And the other issue is they're testing 12 PFAS. So since the consent order was written, part of the consent order required this thing called non-targeted analysis that showed what chemicals, Detlef touched on this, what chemicals are in. You couldn't tell how much, but you can tell how many. They found 257 unknown PFAS from Chemours alone, right? So 257, plus the 60 or 70 we already know of. There's more than 300 PFAS coming from this facility alone, and we're sampling 12. It's ridiculous. And the community can't handle this. Like, this community has been contaminated for 40 years. Our well owners have been probably highly contaminated with that water for 40 years. And we're sampling for 12, and we're only providing filtration if they have one of those 12 at 10 parts per trillion or more, or Gen X at 10 parts per trillion or more. 10 parts per trillion, we know from the EPA health advisory levels for instance, PFOA and PFAS, the legacy chemicals, the original Teflon chemical and the Scotchgard chemical. The EPA has determined that the level of detection is unsafe. That's like 0.0000 something. And we're saying you don't get any protection until you reach 10. And you don't get any protection if you have PFOA or PFAS, because PFOA was made by DuPont. That's not Chemours. So Chemours isn't responsible for the PFOA. So our reaction has been several-fold, but one of them is we got some grant funds, and we've been sampling some folks ourselves. So we got about 30. These are just clips of people's places. And the home on the left is a sweet older couple from Pender County. She qualifies for reverse osmosis, but can't fit it in her tiny home under her sink. Look at that picture. This gentleman over here, this was a family, as a horse farm. He's just like devastated because these are like his children. His horses have been drinking this water, and even if he qualifies for something, it's not gonna help them unless he has that whole house granular activated carbon system, and that takes a lot to get. And so there's just so many stories. There's this gentleman here who is an organic farmer who started an organic farm with his wife because he didn't want to feed people with toxic chemicals. And he found out through his well sampling, he's got about 90 parts per trillion of a whole bunch of PFAS but none of the 12. So he qualifies for nothing. And he stopped doing the work on his farm this year because his ethics held it against his heart. He said, I can't sell food that's tainted with these chemicals. He's out of pocket buying a whole house filtration system. And he's got 90 parts per trillion of random PFAS in his well and gets nothing. This piece I do want to point out is a map. Our prior team member, Patrick Connell, who's not here today, but he's working on this map. This isn't public yet, but there's going to be a whole bunch of things included in this map. This is sort of just a little grab of the Lower Cape Fear and the Fayetteville area sampling of the wells so far. And they're color-coded, and you can't see because it's too small. This is going to be public soon, and it's interactive, and it's really, really disheartening to see, but just super great information. And so keep an eye on us for more information about that. So here is the piece that I wanted to highlight for y'all who have showed up here to do some work. Like Kemp mentioned about his CAFO thing, on your table there is a little sheet about the well sampling conundrum. And what our ask is of DEQ is that every person with a well in the Cape Fear Basin gets whole house filtration or a municipal hookup paid for by Chemours. And so I encourage you to take a picture of that QR code, get on that website. We've already drafted the letter for you. You don't even have to do anything. You can just put your information in and click go, and it will be sent. When I did this presentation, there were 200 or something. I can't see with these glasses on, 250 something. I can't wait to see that there's 500 something later on today that each of you has sent in your letter to DEQ saying that they need to require Chemours to do this because they really do. And this is my last thing. So this is the actual front page of Chemours' air permit in their request to expand PFAS production at Fayetteville Works. And I just thought it was really interesting photo choices, considering how gross this is and how much of a blatant greenwashing this is. They're claiming they need to expand PFAS production at Fayetteville Works while we're sitting here in their toxic chemicals. They need to expand in order to support green energy. That's what they're telling everybody. And they put this, these weird little plants on their front of their permit application. I just thought it was so gross. And so I just said experts in greenwashing, not so much in chemistry, because they keep on talking about how they're experts in chemistry. And I would, request that they let us know why their chemists can't come up with green energy technology that also doesn't kill people. Like, I think that is a thing that we can figure out, right? So the response to that was amazing by the community. These are these open houses that were required under the consent order. They tried to skirt them. Our lawyer said, no, you have to hold them and you have to hold two. But they held these open houses, which is what many of you came to and saw, where the Chemours reps stand next to posters and talk about how great this is going to be for your community and make you come in 10 at a time. So there's no power in numbers. There's no feeling of support from community. They know exactly what they're doing to keep you quiet, and that's what they did. And we knew they were going to do that. So we held these events instead. And so we had an event up in Bladen County, and we had picketers, and we had folks providing their own public comment, an event in Leland as well at both of the open houses, and they were so inspiring. And we, had folks come up and provide their public comment, because these events that Chemours hosted did not allow that. So the second piece that I have for you for your action for today is this expansion letter, similar to the other letter. It's already written for you. It just says DEQ, don't let them expand, or something like that. It's pretty basic. It's also in the address field, I added the Chemours neighbors email address because I thought that would be fun. So they're getting these too. And we have quite a few already written. And the special thing about this is that DEQ did not have to publicize the way that they did this air permit request. They only have to do like this little blurb in the Star News or something. They made a press release about this, not something they're required to do, right? And also in that press release, they included an email address that they created, chemours@ncdnr.gov. And that's weird. They created a special email address and they said, if you have any comments, let us know. The public comment period isn't open. DEQ is asking for your public comment. And to me, ever the optimist, I think they need your public comment. They need the strength in order to basically deny this permit. They need the strength in numbers from the community to say, look at all these people who said don't do this. The public comment period isn't open. Thankfully, DEQ has been hard on them, and it's currently sitting in a little bit of a stalled space because Kenmore said, we don't have to do this thing called a fate and transport in our permit, which is like, obviously, like, how do you make the fate and transport of PFAS look good? Like, they don't want to do that. So they said, we don't have to do that. And DEQ said, yes, you do. And so they said, we're going to stall this until you do. So that's where it sits. Public comment period isn't open yet. Again, DEQ has asked for your public comment. So please send it. Once the public comment period opens, we'll suggest some hearings and some other things to be even more active. And what else can you do? Contact your North Carolina legislators. We have, currently it's a session. That's why most of our legislators, none of our legislators are here. We might have to change this date for next year. They're in session. There's a couple PFAS bills. Call them. We've got a QR code for your legislators too to find them. So it's just an easy little link to find who your legislator is. You put your address in and call them and email them and tell them you care about this and they need to care about this or they're not getting your vote. And contact EPA, tell Secretary or Administrator Regan that this lawsuit is a waste of our time, that EPA shouldn't be spending their resources, nor should we, on a lawsuit about forcing Chemours to conduct health studies. I mean, that's just ridiculous, right? Be a smart consumer. It's hard because they don't require that you label, PFAS. So just, do your homework. It's in dental floss. It's in makeup. It's in like my daughter, mascara we were talking about the other day. It's in paint. It's in, firefighting gear. It's in firefighting foams. It's in your Scotch Guard and your raincoats and obviously your pans, your pots and pans and, all these things. So the less you buy, the more they make. And vote. And then the last thing I'll ask is that you get on our email list if you aren't already. We provide updates and things on PFAS and other issues every other week. We don't bombard you, but they're super helpful to keep in touch. And this is a slide I also shared last year, and I questioned whether to do it last year, and folks said I should do it, and so I'm doing it again. And this is sort of the lead up to our film later. We've got our firefighters over here. I'm so grateful that they've come. This is my brother Grant, who was a Chicago firefighter. And we found out he had brain cancer in 2017, soon after we found out about PFAS in our region. He died in 2019. We don't really know if his brain cancer had to do with his PFAS exposure. And so that's not okay, right? We shouldn't not know. And so we need to keep doing all we can to make these people tell us what the stuff is and stop exposing us to it. And that is it for me. Thank you.